She spent years holding it all together. The meals, the schedules, the smiles. Believing that one mistake would confirm what she feared most, that she wasn't enough. Her days blurred into a cycle of exhaustion and guilt, where every crack in her armor felt like proof of failure. But something shifted the moment a stranger spoke 5 words that shattered everything she'd been told about motherhood. This is the story of a woman who learned that perfection was never the goal, and that her breaking point became her greatest awakening. What she discovered changed not just her life, but the way she saw herself. If you've ever felt like you're drowning while everyone thinks you're swimming, this story will stay with you long after it ends. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrubbed the same plate for the 3rd time, the warm water running over her fingers until they pruned. The kitchen clock read 2:15 in the morning, and she couldn't remember when she'd started cleaning. Her daughter's science project sat half-finished on the dining table, the poster board edges curling slightly under the overhead light. She'd promised to help Emma complete it after dinner. But dinner had stretched into homework supervision, then bath time, then the discovery that her son needed a specific colored shirt for school photos the next day. A shirt that didn't exist in his closet and required an emergency late-night laundry cycle. The exhaustion felt physical now, like something living inside her chest. Sarah placed the clean plate in the dish rack with mechanical precision and reached for another, even though the sink was nearly empty. She needed to keep moving. If she stopped, she might have to acknowledge the tightness in her throat or the way her vision blurred at the edges. Stopping meant viewing, and feeling meant confronting the question that haunted her every single day. Why wasn't she better at this? Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her husband, Mark, who was 3 days into a business trip in Denver. "How's everything going? Kids okay?" She stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain that everything was simultaneously fine and falling apart? That the kids were fed, clean, and sleeping? But she'd snapped at Emma twice over simple questions and had locked herself in the bathroom for 7 minutes just to breathe without someone needing something from her. She typed back, "All good. Sleep well." Then she set the phone face down and returned to the dishes that didn't need washing. The next morning arrived with the violence of an alarm she'd snoozed too many times. Sarah jolted awake on the couch, still wearing yesterday's jeans, her neck cramped from the awkward angle against the armrest. Sunlight cut through the living room curtains, harsh and accusatory. 6:42. School started at 7:30. Her heart hammered as she rushed upstairs, her body moving on autopilot through the morning chaos she'd orchestrated 1,000 times before. "Emma! Tyler! We're late!" Her voice came out sharper than intended. And she watched her daughter's face crumple slightly as she stumbled out of her bedroom, hair tangled, eyes still heavy with sleep. Sarah felt the familiar stab of guilt. She shouldn't yell. Good mothers didn't yell. Good mothers woke up early, made balanced breakfasts, braided hair with patience, and hummed cheerful songs while packing nutritious lunches. She grabbed a brush and worked through Emma's knots with quick, efficient strokes that made her daughter wince. "Mom," she looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror. A woman she barely recognized, with dark circles carved beneath her eyes, and lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. When had she become this person? When had motherhood transformed from joy into a series of tasks she was failing to complete correctly? "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry." She softened her grip and worked more carefully, but the damage was done. Emma's shoulders remained tense, her silence loud with unspoken hurt. Tyler appeared in gin shorts and the wrong colored shirt, navy instead of white. Of course, the white shirt was still damp in the dryer, forgotten in last night's exhausted haze. The drive to school was quiet, except for the radio's mindless chatter. Sarah gripped the steering wheel and felt the weight of every small failure pressing down on her chest. The forgotten shirt, the rushed breakfast of granola bars eaten in the car, the science project that Emma had to finish alone after Sarah fell asleep on the couch, too depleted to keep her promise. These weren't catastrophes. No one was hurt. No real harm done. So why did it feel like she was drowning? She watched Emma and Tyler disappear through the school doors, their backpacks bouncing against their small shoulders, and something inside her cracked a little wider. Other mothers lingered in the parking lot, chatting in clusters, their makeup fresh, their laughter easy. Sarah put the car in reverse and left before anyone could catch her eye. She couldn't perform casual conversation today. She couldn't pretend that she had it all together when the seams were clearly splitting. The pediatrician's office waiting room smelled like antiseptic and artificial lavender. Sarah sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, filling out forms for Tyler's checkup scheduled for later that afternoon. Another appointment. Another item on the endless list. Her handwriting grew messier with each line, her mind wandering to the work emails piling up in her inbox, the dinner she hadn't planned, the permission slip she'd forgotten to sign, the phone call she needed to return to her mother, who would inevitably ask if she was taking care of herself. A question Sarah had no honest answer for. Sarah Mitchell? A nurse called her name, and she looked up confused. Tyler's appointment wasn't for another 2 hours. She'd come early just to sit somewhere quiet, somewhere that wasn't home with its towers of laundry and dishes and demands. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. My son's appointment isn't until 3, Sarah said, approaching the desk. The nurse checked her computer and frowned. We had you down for a consultation today. Dr. Reynolds requested it after your last visit. Sarah's mind went blank. She didn't remember scheduling anything. She didn't remember a last visit that would require a follow-up consultation. But she also didn't remember a lot of things lately. Time had become slippery, days bleeding into each other without clear boundaries. Okay, yes, sorry. She followed the nurse down the narrow hallway, past examination rooms where children cried and mothers soothed with practiced voices. They stopped at a door marked with Dr. Reynolds' name, and the nurse gestured for her to enter. Dr. Reynolds sat behind a modest desk, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes warm behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been Tyler's pediatrician since birth, a steady presence in the chaos of new motherhood. But Sarah couldn't understand why she was here without her son. Sarah, thank you for coming in. Please sit down. Dr. Reynolds' voice carried a gentleness that made Sarah's defenses rise. She sat on the edge of the chair, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. I don't understand. Is Tyler okay? Did something happen? Tyler is fine. But during his last checkup, I noticed something. Not with him, with you. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, her expression open and concerned. You seemed exhausted in a way that went beyond normal tired. You were distracted, anxious, and when I asked Tyler to draw a picture of his family, he drew you with your eyes closed. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her throat constricted, and she felt the dangerous prick of tears behind her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Crying meant weakness. Crying meant she couldn't handle what every other mother seemed to handle with grace. "I'm just tired. It's normal. I have 2 kids, a job, a husband who travels. It's just life." Her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "Sarah, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? When was the last time you felt genuinely rested?" The questions hung in the air, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she didn't have answers. Months? Years? She couldn't pinpoint a single moment when she'd felt at peace, when she'd existed as something other than a mother, a wife, an employee, a daughter, a caretaker. "I don't have time for myself. That's what being a mother means. You sacrifice, put everyone else first. That's what I'm supposed to do." The words came out defensive, rehearsed, like a script she'd memorized from some invisible rulebook she'd been following her entire adult life. Dr. Reynolds was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her words were deliberate and careful. "Sarah, you're allowed to be human. You're allowed to need rest. You're allowed to struggle. Motherhood isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And you can't be present when you're running on empty." The statement landed like a detonation in Sarah's chest. She sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Allowed to be human. The phrase repeated in her mind, foreign and radical, like permission she'd never considered asking for. Her entire identity had been built on the opposite belief, that she had to be flawless, tireless, endlessly capable, that any sign of weakness was failure, that needing help meant she wasn't enough. "I don't know how to do that," Sarah whispered, and the tears she'd been holding back finally broke free, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her face in the sterile quiet of the doctor's office. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed and relieved in equal measure, and for the first time in years, she let herself break. Dr. Reynolds passed Sarah a box of tissues without judgment, without platitudes, just quiet understanding that somehow made the crying worse. Sarah hadn't realized how much she'd been holding inside until it started pouring out. Years of exhaustion, resentment she felt guilty for having, anger at herself for not being stronger, fear that she was damaging her children by being less than perfect. The words tumbled out between sobs, disjointed and raw, and Dr. Reynolds listened to all of it. "I see my kids' faces when I snap at them, and I hate myself. I see other mothers who look put together, who seem to enjoy every moment, and I wonder what's wrong with me. Why can't I just be grateful? Why can't I just do this better?" Sarah's voice broke on the last word, and she pressed the tissue against her eyes, trying to regain some composure. "Those other mothers you're comparing yourself to? They're struggling too. They're just better at hiding it, or you're only seeing the edited version of their lives. Nobody is doing this perfectly, Sarah. Nobody." Dr. Reynolds pulled out a notepad and wrote something down before sliding it across the desk. "This is a therapist who specializes in maternal mental health. I want you to call her, not because something is wrong with you, but because you deserve support." Sarah stared at the name and number, her fingers trembling as she picked up the paper. Therapy. The word carried weight she wasn't sure she was ready to hold. Admitting she needed therapy felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that she really was failing. But another part of her, the part that had just sobbed in a pediatrician's office, was too tired to keep pretending. What do I tell Mark? What do I tell my kids? The questions came out small and frightened. You tell them the truth, that you're taking care of yourself so you can take care of them. That would be a gift, Sarah. showing your children that adults are allowed to struggle and ask for help. That's a lesson worth teaching. Sarah left the office with the paper folded in her purse and a strange mixture of relief and terror churning in her stomach. The afternoon sun felt too bright as she sat in her car, staring at the steering wheel, trying to gather the courage to do something different. Her phone showed 12 missed notifications, work emails, text messages, reminders. The world kept demanding, kept pulling, kept expecting her to be available and capable at all times. She thought about Emma's drawing, the one where Tyler had sketched her with closed eyes. Is that how her children saw her? As someone who was physically present, but fundamentally absent? The thought made her chest ache. She'd been so focused on doing everything right that she'd stopped actually being there. She'd become a ghost in her own life, going through motions without feeling, checking boxes without experiencing joy. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the therapist's number before she could talk herself out of it. The receptionist who answered was kind and efficient, and within minutes, Sarah had an appointment scheduled for the following week. It felt surreal, carving out an hour just for herself, just to talk about her own feelings. It felt selfish. It felt necessary. It felt terrifying and hopeful, all at once. When she picked up Tyler from school that afternoon, she made herself slow down. Instead of rushing through the pickup line and launching immediately into questions about homework and behavior, she parked the car and really looked at him. His hair stuck up in the back, and he had a grass stain on his knee, and his smile when he saw her was uncomplicated and full of love. When had she stopped noticing these details? "Hey, buddy, how was your day?" She kept her voice soft, genuinely curious. Tyler climbed into his booster seat and launched into an animated story about a lizard he'd found on the playground, his words tumbling over each other with excitement. Sarah listened, really listened, and felt something loosen in her chest. This was what mattered. Not the perfect lunch, or the signed permission slip, or the spotless kitchen. This moment, this connection, this small person who just wanted to share his world with her. That evening, after Mark called from Denver, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She told him the truth. Not the sanitized version she usually offered, but the real, messy truth about how she'd been feeling. About the exhaustion that had become her baseline. About crying in Dr. Reynolds' office. About the therapist appointment. About how she couldn't keep doing everything alone while pretending it was effortless. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah braced herself for disappointment or dismissal. Instead, Mark's voice came through, quiet and strained. "I didn't know it was this bad. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I had to handle it. Because I thought needing help meant I was weak." Saying it out loud made her realize how absurd it sounded, how impossible the standard she'd been holding herself to. "Sarah, you're not weak. He paused, searching for words. "You're carrying too much. We need to figure this out together. I need to do more. I should have seen this." They talked for over an hour, the longest uninterrupted conversation they'd had in months. They made a plan. Small, practical changes. Mark would reduce his travel schedule. They'd hire help for housework twice a month. Sarah would stop volunteering for every school event and committee. They'd alternate bedtime routines so she could have 3 evenings a week to herself. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a beginning. The first therapy session the following week felt awkward and uncomfortable. Sarah sat on a gray couch across from Dr. Chen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an unhurried manner and struggled to explain what she was feeling. But Dr. Chen asked questions that nobody had ever asked before. Not, how are the kids? Or, is everyone healthy? But what do you need? And what would bring you joy? And who were you before you became a mother? That last question stopped Sarah cold. She couldn't answer it. Somewhere along the way, she disappeared into her roles, had become nothing but a collection of responsibilities and obligations. The woman she'd been, the one who loved reading mysteries late into the night, who took long walks just to think, who painted terrible watercolors and laughed at her own lack of talent. That woman had been buried under years of should and must and have to. I want to find her again, Sarah whispered, surprised by her own honesty. Then let's start there, Dr. Chen replied. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were still hard days when Sarah felt overwhelmed and inadequate. There were still moments when she snapped at her kids or forgot important details or felt crushed by the weight of everything. But slowly, incrementally, something shifted. She started saying no without drowning in guilt. She started taking walks in the evening while Mark handled bedtime. She joined a book club and remembered what it felt like to have conversations that weren't about parenting or logistics. One Saturday morning, 3 months after that breaking point in Dr. Reynolds' office, Sarah woke up naturally, without an alarm. Sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, soft and golden. She could hear Mark downstairs with the kids, the sounds of breakfast being made, laughter floating up through the floorboards. She stretched in bed, feeling rested, in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. When she came downstairs, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table with her art supplies spread out, working on a drawing. Sarah poured herself coffee and sat down beside her daughter, watching as she carefully colored in a family portrait. This time, Sarah's eyes were open and she was smiling. "That's beautiful, Em," Sarah said softly. Emma looked up at her mother with those perceptive 8-year-old eyes and smiled back. "You look happy again, Mom. I like it when you're happy." Sarah's throat tightened, but this time with gratitude instead of guilt. She pulled Emma close and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her daughter's shampoo. She wasn't perfect. She never would be. But she was present. She was trying. She was human. And somehow, miraculously, that was enough.